Well, welcome everyone to this session on the Strong Cities Network and a model for change. I'm Eric Roseanne. I'm the Executive Director of the Strong Cities Network. And with us we have three distinguished speakers. The former mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, Allison Silberberg, the former mayor of Chattanooga, Andy Burke, who's also the Special Representative for Broadband at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. And then finally, we have Jumana Silvansaba, the Director of Policy and Enforcement for the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department for the City of Los Angeles. Before we have a conversation, which I hope you'll join in by scanning the QR code on your phone so you can ask questions which will appear on my handy iPad so that you can join the conversation. But before we start the conversation, I thought I'd say a few words about the Strong Cities Network and why there's a session being devoted to it at this summit. So SCN, as we call it, was launched in 2015 around the time that the ISIS threat globally was at its peak. And the idea was to try to get more cities, local governments, local leaders involved in what was clearly becoming a threat that was incredibly localized, and that people were leaving to go to Iraq and Syria from different communities, cities in Europe and beyond in the United States, and to get mayors and city governments engaged. Over time, the network has grown to over 160 members now, and the issues it focuses on are much, much broader than the ones it started focusing on. And so today, it addresses issues of hate, extremism, and polarization in all of its forms. It's really more about building resilient cities, cohesive cities, inclusive cities that can withstand the shocks of extremism, but also prevent extremism from taking root in the first place. And we've had a lot of success over the last few years in building out our work internationally in Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and we've had less success in the United States. And part of the reason why success was limited in the United States originally was because the issues of violent extremism in 2015 in this country were very polarizing. And many felt that it was targeting particular religious community. Many felt it was surveillance or intelligence work by another means. And so there wasn't a lot of appetite from cities, city governments, mayors, to associate themselves with that agenda. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, and obviously the situation is very different. Issues of hate, extremism, and polarization are front and center in so many communities, unfortunately, around this country. So many cities, unfortunately, have experienced attacks or have thwarted attacks. And we have a summit here in Pittsburgh where stakeholders from around the country at every level are here to figure out ways to address these challenges more effectively than they've been in the past. And so one idea for us is to see how we can activate this network in the United States and get mayors engaged with each other, learning from each other, and also learning from their counterparts overseas, because a lot of cities, a lot of towns, a lot of villages have, in one way or another, experienced the kinds of violence that Buffalo, Uvalde, El Paso, Dayton, Alexandria, Chattanooga have experienced. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and it doesn't always have to come from the national government on down. It really can come, in fact, it should come much more organically through local connections, which we can help facilitate. So I will stop there, and then I will begin a conversation with my panelists. But and I really encourage you to ask questions. So the first question I would actually ask to Allison, as a mayor when you became mayor of Alexandria, I imagine that issues of extremism, the kind of attack you saw at the congressional softball game or baseball practice, was, of all the things on your to-do list or get ready for list, that was not sort of, fortunately, was not at or near the top. So what did you do when you were faced with this unexpected, traumatic act of violence in your community? What did you turn to? Where were the lessons that you brought in from the outside? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Eric, I was sworn in the first day of January 2016, and about a month before that, at New Mayor's School at Harvard, the Kennedy School of Government, they provided almost a week's worth of graduate school level sort of advice, if you will, best practices from other mayors across the country. And what they, one of the things they talked about was Black Swan events. And this really struck home for me, and that tragedy in Boston with the marathon had just happened, and Mayor Marty Walsh of Boston, now our labor secretary, Marty Walsh, was there with his chief of police talking about Black Swan events. And he looked at us, and there were like 15 mayors who had just been elected, like myself, and from across the country. And he said, any day, any time, this can happen. It was really the chief of police who really emphasized it, and it really struck a chord. So while it wasn't top of mind necessarily, I had that reference. And any day, any moment, something can happen in your city. It doesn't matter. It can be any city. And we keep saying as a country, oh, it can't happen here. And then it does happen in all these cities. My city of Alexandria, right outside of Washington, D.C., a 10-minute drive to Capitol Hill, but right across the Potomac River. And it's beautiful. We have extremely low crime. And then one morning, on a weekday morning, there was a congressional baseball practice. There's an annual baseball game for charity purposes that the Republicans play against the Democrats, or the Democrats against the Republicans, whatever you want to say. And it's for charity, and it's all for fun. And the Republicans were practicing at 7 in the morning on one of our baseball fields. And there was someone who had driven into our city and was living in our city out of his van. And a few people had noticed him and talked with him. But he was living like right in his van right there. And that morning, and he had all these guns with him. And he just went to that baseball field at 7 in the morning. He had heard that the Republicans were practicing there, and he just started shooting. And so our reaction was immediate. First of all, Steve Scalise, Congressman Steve Scalise, part of the leadership of the Republican Party on the Hill, he had Capitol Police with him as a security detail. So those two officers jumped out of their SUV immediately and started shooting, but a number of people were already injured on the field. And it was unbelievably, horrible. Steve Scalise was incredibly injured. It's a miracle he survived. At least 2 other people were grievously injured, and there were other injuries. Anyway, and then within 2 minutes of the origination, our Alexandria police, 3 of our officers showed up. 2 to 2.5 minutes. And so between those 5 officers, they killed the shooter, and before the all clear, our EMTs ran onto the field and saved lives. But there was also mutual aid. So one thing that communities can do is they often have mutual aid agreements, so that if you're inundated in your community, everybody just comes over and helps. It's kind of an old-fashioned, they call it mutual aid. But I did want to mention one thing. So even before I was sworn in, the first few days of January 2016, I'd said to the city manager that I really want us to do a tabletop exercise regarding public safety. At first, this was actually not okay with the city manager, but we ended up doing it. I pushed hard for it, and we wanted to do it on day 1. And so everyone who would be involved in a public safety incident in a city would be in the room in a small conference room. And so we did that, and it ended up that 2 people, that were important to the team did not know each other, had not met, did not know what each other would be doing in case of an incident, and didn't have each other's cell phone numbers. Now, one of the things that was told to me, and I got this idea about the tabletop exercise at the new mayor school, at the Kennedy School of Government. So the ideas from that 1 week were just, or 5 days, it was just incredible. But the tabletop exercise, any city, any leadership in any city could do that. And it's just like practicing as a family. What would you do, like you would say to your family, what would you do if there's a fire? And my dad, when I was a little kid, said to me, what would you do if there's a fire? And I was like, I'm supposed to get on the floor. And he said, I want you to leave the house through your bedroom window. If you're in your room in the middle of the night and you hear there's a fire, just go through the window. And if you can't get out, throw your chair through it. And everybody's meeting at the mailbox across the street. And it always stayed with me. It's all that's preparation. Well, cities have to do preparation.
Yeah. And in terms of the Andy, the connections that Allison's talking about, my understanding from your time as mayor in Chattanooga was a lot of your focus was on integrating the city in different ways. And then you're faced with this attack, which maybe you can talk a little bit about on the Armed Forces Center, Recruitment Center, this Islamist extremist attack. How do you sort of balance the connections that you're trying to build within a city and have that sort of endure an attack that's very divisive? Maybe you can speak a little bit about your experience.
Well, so the first thing is that our attack was intended to be divisive, and so the first pushback on the attack is this is not going to be divisive in our city. In fact, that was some of the first things that we said. So in July of 2015, an attacker who was from our community had gotten online, had been radicalized, had gone to Jordan, came back. He went out to a recruitment center, fired several hundred bullets into a recruitment center in suburban Chattanooga, hit one Marine who fortunately was not seriously injured, drove about 3 miles to the Naval Operations Support Center where reservists were drilling, went in, started shooting there, killed 4 Marines and a sailor. It was about 1 mile from our, maybe less than a mile from our police station, our main police station. Basically everybody who was there went down. And people even got into golf carts to get there. One of our officers was injured in the fight with the attacker, ended up killing him. And so there was this immediate moment right after this event where I pulled everybody in to the mayor's office, to my office, and pulled out a whiteboard. And it wasn't clear at the time exactly what had happened, but it seemed like it had been a radicalized young man. We told everybody what happened, and I wrote a bunch of rules on the whiteboard. And one of them was, no one will be radicalized as a result of what happened here today. That was one of my rules. And that will be the way that we operate over these next, however long we're in this moment. And so I think, Eric, back to your question of what is, first of all, fortunately I had very strong ties to the Muslim community in Chattanooga. I'm Jewish. In fact, there's lots of commonality between the Muslim and the Jewish community in places like Chattanooga. And so I was able to reach out. The police chief, who, in a bit of luck, but maybe a little bit of skill, like I'd hired the police chief. He was one of the most inclusive and, let's face it, liberal police chiefs in the country, and was just all about community. And so we went out, and both of us, everywhere as loudly as possible, said, everyone has a right in our community to be safe. We some of the first calls was to Muslim Chattanoogans to say, you have a right to be safe. We want to partner with you on that. And the second piece is that, we are with you to make this an even better community as a result of this. And so that was really terrific and kind of started us on a long journey to how we build inclusivity that really empowers everybody. In a different, we've been doing this before, it kind of put this through a whole new lens.
And thank you. And Jemana, as a city that obviously this is the second biggest city in the country, and it's as diverse as they come and as large as they come, and has faced probably as many challenges, issues, different forms of violence as any big city does face. What motivates a city like LA that is so busy to want to join the Strong Cities Network? Like, what does LA have to learn from others? And I'd just be interested to hear sort of the journey that you've been on with Strong Cities since LA was one of the founding members.
Thank you, Eric. And it's such an honor to be on the panel with Mayor Silverberg and Mayor Burke. I know we've been on panels before, but as you mentioned, Eric, LA is a global city. We have some of the largest diaspora communities outside their native countries anywhere in the world. We have more than 200 languages spoken in our city. So by all definitions, we are a global city. And the work that we do at the city isn't insular. What happens not just in LA, but what happens in other US cities, we are impacted. And as we heard, from both mayors here, mayors have the very difficult job of being at the forefront of catastrophe, whether that is man-made, nature, but the work isn't just the response. The work is what happens, how we build relationships, how we implement diplomacy at the local level. But that work is connected, as I said, it's not insular. So when something happens halfway around the world, our communities are impacted. And therefore, as a city, to be able to connect with networks, global networks, local cities, it makes not only our response stronger, it makes our ability to prevent and to have the types of interventions that we need to tailor that much more stronger. So the idea is to learn from other cities, how other cities are implementing, but to then be able to tailor those solutions to fit the unique needs of cities. City leadership and mayors in particular have a very unique opportunity because while mayors and local cities understand the unique niche of their neighborhoods and the unique needs within their neighborhoods, there is also an opportunity to influence what happens nationally. So that the idea of understanding national policy, the idea of understanding global policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It actually happens at the grassroots level, at city level. And this is why, being a part of the Strong Cities Network has really been a tremendous benefit to the work that we've been doing in LA, not only in terms of how we share lessons learned, but when we look at how other cities are implementing things around the world, we also have relevance because likely we have that diaspora community within our neighborhoods. And now we have a much better understanding of not only how we engage, but how we also implement the kinds of initiatives, the kinds of programming that is culturally applicable. The last thing I'll mention here is that LA, we talked about being inclusive cities, but that is part of a core value, right? Being an inclusive city is a core value of the city of LA. It's something that Mayor Garcetti has not only infused in his administration, but it's something that he has infused in just about every department and throughout the operation of the city. So when we say being an inclusive city isn't just a mantra. It is how we implement from the very basic city service and all the way to some of the most complex global challenges, such as climate change, such as the global challenge of extremism and hate. And unfortunately, these are the kinds of things that play at the city level. And the only way we can be prepared is by ensuring that we're building those relationships, we're implementing diplomacy at the grassroots level, but that we're also there at the global stage, at the national stage, being a part of the bigger conversation of what solutions could look like and what effective solutions look like in implementation at the grassroots level.
Thank you. And as former mayors, Allison and Andy, when these incidents happened, were there other mayors you would turn to find out what they did in similar situations? What was your sort of, or did you have sort of a path which you sort of figure out how to follow, or did you just sort of make it up as you went along because it was such a disparate experience across different mayors around the country?
Well, our situations were clearly different. I mean, Andy's, as he described, is different from mine. In my situation, there was a lone gunman who didn't live anywhere near my state, anywhere near my city, who came and didn't know anyone, and then, shot all these people. And luckily, they all survived. So, but we, to Jemana's point, we did have certain things in place. We had practiced public safety, et cetera, and the mutual aid helped. But also, I just want to mention the police chief, the fire chief, and the sheriff and I went door to door and did what they called a welfare check after the shooting in that whole neighborhood. And the fact the police and the fire department did that all day long. And then different mayors reached out to me and texted me that they were thinking of me, including Greg Fisher and Nan Whaley, Greg Fisher of Louisville, Kentucky, and Nan Whaley, the mayor of Dayton, Ohio. So it meant a lot to me. In addition, I had created a clergy council in Alexandria. I also got that idea from Mayor Marty Walsh of Boston at New Mayor School, and borrowed the idea and made it my own. And when that tragedy happened in Alexandria in the summer of 17, the clergy were texting me. And any city can create a clergy council. It's free, it's easy, but it makes a huge difference. And that can also be an aspect of what's so important about Strong Cities Network, is creating that resilience before you need it, before an incident. Some people say it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when something will happen, depending upon what that might be. It might be like what we had, but it could be a storm, it could be war, it could be a pandemic. So, and then I'd like us to get back to inclusiveness in a minute, but I wanted to hear what Andy wanted to say.
So I said that that the event in Chattanooga happened in July of 2015. I remember in June of 2015 watching TV when the shooting happened in Charleston, and one of my true heroes as a mayor, Joe Riley, mayor of Charleston, came on, and I could see, having known him, I could see. Listen, getting a little goosebumps here. Like, I've seen Nan Whaley, who's my friend. I've seen Bill Peduto. All these people I know who've gone through this, but I remember seeing Joe Riley and thinking, my gosh, what if something like that happened here? And as you said, this is around the time that Strong Cities started. And so a lot has happened. But at the time, this was about kind of looking and thinking about these things, trying to see, okay, I've kind of heard stories, but it wasn't systematic in the way that I think Strong Cities Network is trying to make that happen now. And there are certain fundamental things that people need to know, both on the preventive side and then on the response side, that you just need to have thought of beforehand that are really important. And so it's feels like we did a decent job as, we tried to muddle our way through an incident like this, which is just unfathomable. But I always try to point out to people, if there are, let's call it 250 mass shootings a year, you're mayor for 8 years, which is what I was. It's a city it's one, a top 100 city in terms of population. The odds start working against you in these things, and you really have to be thoughtful about what you're doing on the prevention side and on the response side.
And I think one of the things that we try to do as a network is to underscore how, yes, although the facts of your situation are very different than the facts of your situation that you experienced, the terrorist attack, there are a lot of similarities in terms of what a city and what a mayor has to do in prevention and mitigating the damage afterwards. And this actually gets to an initiative that the city of LA, thanks to Jemana and Mayor Garcetti, have been leading in the Strong Cities Network around violence prevention and looking at violence prevention sort of holistically. And maybe, Jemana, you can say a little bit about that work and why LA thought it was an initiative worth championing.
Yeah, definitely. And so we've recently hosted the Summit of the Americas in LA. And as we hosted the summit, this was a tremendous opportunity to bring together a group of mayors, practitioners, researchers, and it was really wonderful to partner with you, Eric, and the Strong Cities Network, but also with the McCain Institute, and as well as VIP Lab with the University of San Diego. And we pulled together a side event on the margins of the Summit of the Americas. And as we started to think around the event and really to think around how can we bring about the tangibles and the kinds of outcomes that we want to take, nationally and globally. And as we thought through that, we were very intent on ensuring that the conversation in that roundtable included mayor. We ended up with 8 mayors at that roundtable. Of course, Mayor Garcetti opened and led the roundtable, but we also had mayors from, and help me out here, Eric, if I blank on anybody, but we had mayors from Costa Rica, we had mayors from Bogota, Colombia. There were mayors from, what was the other one?
Guatemala?
Guatemala, thank you. And then we also had the mayor of Denver and the current mayor of Chattanooga. And it was just really fascinating because the way that conversation was engaged, even though these were very different cities, when it came down to understanding their challenges, those challenges were very similar. Because at the end of the day, as mayors, how do they implement the kinds of youth programming that is going to help in prevention work, that's going to cultivate healthy and well-being of communities, right? How are they going to infuse the kinds of public health framework that is much needed in these neighborhoods? And one of the things that came out pretty strongly in these conversations, and even following the mayor discussion and a lot of the conversations that happened in the roundtable with the practitioners and researchers and policymakers, one thing that came out really strong, and that was the role of women. And there was a lot of shared experiences in how women were central to the success of some of the initiative and the programming that was being implemented at the local level. The other top thing that really came out very strongly sort of across the board in these conversations was this tremendous need to preserve democracy. And we heard that really across the board from all the cities that were participating in the roundtable, is this idea of elevating human rights, elevating the core principles of democracy as foundational to the work of prevention and to the work of creating the types of resilience and the strong and the well-being of communities. Because without the environment where you have human rights, where democracy can strive, it's very difficult to have healthy communities. It's very difficult to have striving economies. And these were sort of some of the really top-level things that came out. I think the conversation around equity and inclusion was also a top point. The conversation around racism and institutional racism and some of the challenges that were being faced, by pretty much all the cities that were in attendance. And we did have even, from Canada that were in attendance. And so it really was such a vibrant conversation. I think a big takeaway from that really is obviously building the networks of these neighborhoods, but also those cities, elevating the well-being of communities, and continuing to invest in democracy and human rights as foundations.
So can I just add one thing on top of that, and that is that after our attack, and again, some of the publicity that came out about Chattanooga about this, Mike Duffin, who's among the throngs out here at the U.S. State Department, got me involved in the Strong Cities Network. And one of the things that was so clear when I did work overseas was that because of the peculiar circumstances of those places, that there was a much more intentional viewpoint. People like cities and state and nations had viewpoints about what they were supposed to be doing. It may not be exactly what we wanted to do, and that was infused in all kinds of different ways. And talking to people made it seem like, wait, there are these different places where touch points that we have where we need to be doing work. And I'll give you one example. So right now, as you said, I'm the special representative for broadband in the administration, and we have money to do digital equity, which is how do people get an email address online and how do they use a computer. The person, the attacker in Chattanooga, was radicalized online. Okay, we're trying to get every single American an internet connection. And so, we're, at least for me, part of what I'm thinking about is like, even as we get people, how do we make sure that people have healthy habits online, so that they're spotting what's information, what's disinformation, what's misinformation, saving our democracy. Like, when you're intentional about these things and you're learning from each other, you're putting that in all the different pieces of what you're doing, not just like there's this one thing that we're doing called inclusivity or response, and then there's all the other stuff that we do.
And so this gets to the issue of the role of the mayor, right? So we've heard about all these different threads of threads of responses, but as a mayor, what do you think are the top 2 or 3 things that he or she can do to tie this all together, to sort of project a coherent sort of narrative around these issues that can make the city inclusive? Allison?
Well, about 9-10 months into my term, I decided that we should have a statement on inclusiveness. And as a writer, I went ahead, I initiated and I wrote it, and I actually and we ended up putting it on a poster. And it's in English. It's very short. So it's in English and Spanish, Amharic, and Arabic on one single poster. And the schools put it up, the libraries, the rec centers, but then businesses, people wanted them in their homes. And it's very simple. So anyone can read it. It's just a few short paragraphs. Alexandria, Virginia is a city of kindness and compassion. And that we're a city that's not just tolerant, but embracing and accepting. So it's not just about what we're against, it's about what we're about, what we're for. And that we denounce all hate and discrimination in all forms, and there's a whole list. Now, any city in the country, any city in the world can adapt this to fit their city. It's an easy cookie cutter recipe, and it ended up garnering national attention. And the reason it did, I think, is because it is so simple, and yet it's powerful. If you're a family from another country, or if you're elderly, or if your daughter or son has been discriminated against in school or bullied or anything, this will speak to you. Any disability, any gender or sexual orientation, any issue is covered in this short statement. And the important thing is to say what your values are. Put it on a poster, just like in the 1700s, and it posts against a tree. And this is what that did. And it's online. And then what ended up happening is that flyers were placed in a neighborhood in our city in the middle of the night. And they were horrible. They were just horrible. They were racist. And anyway, the neighbors took them down, and the police were involved. And I went out there and I said, well, this is a new low in ignorance, whoever put these posters up. And second of all, when the shooting happened, I said immediately, this does not define who we are. This happened in Alexandria, but this shooting has nothing to do with who we are. Now, the shooter, I should have said, and I apologize, Eric, so the shooter was just full of hate. It was political. He hated the Republican leadership and Republicans, and that's why he chose them for shooting them. And it's horrible. It's just unthinkable what happened. And so whatever the hate-filled action is, it cannot go unchecked. I think that is my main message today. And that is really the main message as well, that Strong Cities Network can say to mayors across the world, you have to speak out. You have to say, this is wrong, this is not who we are, this is who we are. And so it's such an important thing that you're doing.
Thank you. And for us, it's not about us as a network saying it, it's about the members of the network, the mayors of the network, saying it and leading by example, and us sort of being able to elevate those voices. So, as Andy, as in your 8 years as mayor, reflecting on that, what do you think are 2 or 3 sort of, if someone experienced an attack right now, if your successor, God forbid, experienced an attack, what would be your 2 to 3 lessons to share?
Well, let me start by saying, and back up to your earlier question a little bit about like what is the mayor supposed to be doing in general about this stuff. And the first thing to note is that people are purposely making this very, very hard. There are elements in our society who spend their time trying to divide us, and unlike maybe more like less so than in the past, where mayors were often considered kind of nonpartisan, above, like different. They provide water to the home. They are out there trying to make even mayors be the divisive figures, and that is a problem. It's just a problem. Okay, it's a problem for democracy. So there are 3 things that really you have to be thinking about. Number one is you do need to be thinking about an entire response system, from both like vigils to reunification centers to everything else. And one of the most amazing moments of my life, which I will never forget, is at the vigil a few nights later, the leader of the Muslim community said, "This is the final night of Ramadan. For any other time, we would all be together praying, but tonight we are Chattanoogan's first." And that'll be a moment that I will never, ever, ever forget. So you have this entire response piece that you have to have. And then I think the second piece is on the prevention side, you have to figure out how to make this the work of the community. So I started a council against hate, and this was not run by government people. This was run by leaders of the community. And then when you're working on this, all of a sudden it's not about some political figure. It's about a bunch of community leaders who are leading the charge. And of course, the horrible thing is that in 2017 or whatever year, I think it was 2017 I started, it's controversial to have a council against hate. Like the fact that there were people saying this is a bad thing is an amazing piece of modern politics. And then I think the final piece is that, at least I always thought that part of my job as mayor is to speak on behalf of the community and to say who we are. Not that means everybody in the community is this, but this is who, as a collective, we are and what we do, and you have to do that from day one to last day, because without that, you can't in those moments of crisis all of a sudden pop up and give your message, because it just isn't credible. People don't believe it. And also, like, those are moments where people need somebody that they can count on, that they know is out there and believes in who you are. And so we had, as I said, a very positive response. I don't believe anybody was radicalized that day. And in fact, there were, from kind of every sign, diverse members of our community from all political spectrums got the response, understood what it was, and were able to say, here's what we're doing. That's a huge victory.
So Jemana, Andy touched upon a thing I think that LA has an interesting perspective on, which is sustainability, and how do you institutionalize these responses beyond the life of a single local leader, term of a single local leader. And in LA, because the city is dealing with so many different threats that come and go, and new initiatives pop up, I'm sure all the time for political and other reasons. How does the city sort of make sure that things are continuing and sustained and institutionalized? Are there any lessons from that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think there were already a couple of themes that I'd like to pick up on. Absolutely, the positive messaging is critical, right? It's what we stand for, right? So in LA, we launched the LA for All campaign about a year ago. And this week, in fact, I'm missing all the celebrations. We're commemorating the LA for All week, where the city is lighting the LA for All colors. So City Hall will be lit in the colors LAX. Metro building, major landmarks in LA will be lit in that. But the campaign is in 18 languages. It's on 4,000 city assets. And the reason that campaign worked is that positive messaging, right? You're a part of something, and you're not an outsider or against something. And that message has to be ongoing, consistent, but so is the relationship building. As Mayor Burke very eloquently spoke about his experience in building the relationships, that is work that happens every single day. It's not something that we do when it's convenient. And while we do have, a faith leaders collective that is convened by the mayor, there is a lot of organic work that is happening in the multi-faith space. In the city, and city leadership and local leadership has a tremendous opportunity to cultivate and to elevate this work. It's there, right? Those relationships are there. I think for us in LA, and as at the onset of our conversation, we talked about LA being a global city. Oftentimes, our ability to convene impacted communities, the event may not happen in LA, but we are impacted, right? When Buffalo happened, we had a candlelight vigil, and we had the faith leaders that came around. They didn't come because we just called them for that one event. They came because we have a round table of faith leaders that we meet with regularly. And it's the solutions and the ideas really come from that. So part of institutionalizing this work is acknowledging the organic nature of this work and allowing it the space to continue to grow and flourish. The other aspect of institutionalizing the work is infusing it into city departments, right? And I really love what you said about this work not being sort of, you do it, on this side and you sort of do something else. It's all interconnected. Our holistic approach as cities and local municipalities, it is all connected. But one of the distinct things that happened for us in LA is Mayor Garcetti launched the Department on Civil Human Rights and Equity Department, which did not exist 2 years ago. In 2019, the city signed into law the human rights law for the city of LA. And it's under the mandate of our department to enforce the human rights law and to address discrimination. But it's also within this department that we do the work around hate prevention. It's within this department that we do the work around building equity and inclusion, not only through policy, but also through initiatives like peace and healing centers and participatory budgeting. Those things are infused and they're institutionalized in a department, but they're also infused throughout other city departments. Some of the work that we do is in collaboration with, for example, Department of Arts and Culture, like the LA for All campaign. That was a collaboration between several city departments. So, mayoral administrations, they come and they have their mark, but the only way to have the continuity is to allow the organic nature of this work to grow by giving it life throughout the various departments in the city, and to make sure, and I know this is a difficult one, the resources and the funding is there to support it, right? Because without resources and funding, it's very difficult to sustain this work. And I have to, and I'm sure you've been in the hot seat on a number of times, but really I have to give it to mayors and city leaders who have to often face the challenge of prioritizing their budget. And we don't talk about resources and budget. But when, for example, with the city of LA, when we have an issue like homelessness, which is huge for our city, it really isn't that easy or that simple to prioritize the resources and the funding. But that is also fundamental for the sustainability of this work.
Thank you. And we're going to close, as we've been asked to by the organizers, with thoughts on a deliverable for this panel. And I'll let you think about that while I just say a couple of things. One is, and I'll get back to you. I was struck, Jemana, when you were talking about, and Andy as well, about making different parts of your city feel as one, having a city identity. And that can cut across racial, ethnic, religious divides, and you're part of a city. And in fact, we do a lot of work in Africa with African cities, and we hear that all the time, that is for them, for African mayors who are dealing with issues of hate and tribalism and what have you, and lots of violence in their cities. It's this developing a sense of city identity that is very powerful and very sort of persuasive often to bring the cities together. So again, thousands and thousands of miles away, very different context, very similar sort of foundation for prevention. So turning to the deliverable, one idea, and I'll just get the conversation going, we have about 5 minutes. I know that there's work being done to develop a toolkit for mayors on how to prevent and respond to the kinds of attacks that both Andy and Allison experienced, and Mayor Peduto and others. One idea is for the Strong Cities Network to be a vehicle for pushing that out to mayors across the country, and then not just giving it to them as a book for them to put on their shelf, but actually bringing in former mayors who've gone through these experiences to facilitate conversations with them and their teams on how to apply the manual. So that's a very, I think, low-hanging fruit. I put it out there, see if anyone eats it, but maybe there's other fruit that we should put on the SCN deliverable tree. Allison.
Well, I love the idea of the manual for mayors as a resource. I think that it would be organic, and that people can look at it online and you can update it. Part of that, the statement on inclusiveness that I wrote on the short poster, I think any city can adopt that, but also we did create an Office on Equity, and we said that we would hire a racial equity officer and staff for that, and that's been done since I left. But that was voted on. We voted to remove the Confederate statue in our city. We changed the name of Jefferson Davis Highway to Richmond Highway. We took a series of actions, added restorative justice in our public schools. There are a lot of things that people can do, and I think so, but the 3 deliverables that I would say is writing that statement on inclusiveness and posting it. That does give a city a lot of identity. We're a city that's kind and compassionate. We're a city that embraces and is accepting, not just tolerant. We denounce all hate. These simple declarative sentences. Another deliverable is creating a clergy council. you said it, you have a council the way you created it. Jemana, you mentioned it in LA with all the faith leaders. That's what we did. Reached out to all of them on an ongoing basis, not just when there was an incident. So, and then the third thing was doing that tabletop exercise so that, as Andy says, so that you understand what your public safety reaction is going to be in the event that something happens. Intuitively, you know, it's not on some bookshelf. And then after our incident, actually, so it happened early in the morning. By that late afternoon, around 5 o'clock, we had a candlelight vigil, and we marched through the street as a community together, arm in arm. And then we had a candlelight vigil in many houses of worship across the city.
So you know that I agree with you because I've worked with you on exactly what your suggestion is. So let me just go too quick. I'll be quick, but the first one is a little off script and totally selfish, and that is
broadband for everyone.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is as cities and states across the country are doing this work, and we have funding for it, are there curricula that they can tap into that would help those who are learning how to use broadband for the first time spot misinformation, disinformation, hate online? Would there be things that cities could use that are very easily tapped into? Mm-hmm. That's thing number one. And then thing number two, which is a slight twist on what you said, Eric, and that is I do think that there is power in cities across the country not only having this toolkit, but there be one thing that these big, especially marquee cities, do across the country together that may take on a different form in every city, but just the act of everybody has their own, they all brand it the same way, they all say it the same way, but then they put their own twist underneath it. There's immense power in what that says about us as a country and as city leaders.
Yeah, and I think part of that toolkit should be how to be a part of these networks. Because, I mean, here's the reality for local municipalities is not every local municipality is going to have the bandwidth, quite frankly. I mean, for some of the smaller cities and municipalities, you know, it's really a much more challenging task. Whereas some of the bigger cities that already have some of this infrastructure in place. But being part of these kinds of networks, I think that also is an ability for cities, you know, small or large, to really leverage those networks and these lessons learned. And certainly, you know, even though there's sort of a toolkit and a framework, but how it's implemented is tailored and is really done in a way that fits the unique communities and the unique needs of these various city municipalities. But definitely, I think I would encourage cities to be part of these networks.
Thank you, everyone. And I would just, before we conclude, and I thank the panelists, I just want to point everyone to a new piece that Mike Signer, the former mayor of Charlottesville, and Bill Peduto, obviously the former mayor of this city, just put out on City Lab, which is the Bloomberg publication, calling for more city-led efforts against extremism and making the case for the kinds of solutions, the kind of approaches that we heard up here today. So I want to thank again our speakers. Really enjoyed the conversation. I hope the throngs in the audience did as well. And I wish everyone a productive next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.